On September 28, 1928, a Scottish biologist named Alexander Fleming returned from vacation and found mold growing on a petri dish he had forgotten to clean. The mold had killed the bacteria around it. He identified it as Penicillium notatum. He published a paper. Nobody cared. For over a decade, the discovery that would save more human lives than any other in history sat in a journal, ignored. It took a world war to make anyone pay attention. In 1940, Howard Florey and Ernst Boris Chain at Oxford University, desperate for ways to treat infected soldiers, dug up Fleming's forgotten paper and began extracting penicillin. They tested it on mice. It worked. They tested it on a human patient, Albert Alexander, a police constable dying from a scratch on his face that had become infected. The penicillin worked. His condition improved dramatically. Then they ran out. Alexander relapsed and died on March 15, 1941. They did not have enough. Britain could not manufacture it at scale during wartime. So Florey flew to America with the mold in his coat pocket and convinced U.S. pharmaceutical companies to mass-produce it. Pfizer developed a deep tank fermentation method that multiplied production 1,000-fold. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, there was enough penicillin to treat every Allied soldier who needed it. Fleming, Florey, and Chain shared the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1945. The greatest medical discovery of the 20th century began with a dirty dish. Now take it away. No penicillin. No antibiotics. No way to kill bacterial infections inside the human body. What does the world look like? Start with what killed people before antibiotics existed. Not cancer. Not heart disease. Infection. A cut on your hand while gardening could develop sepsis and kill you in a week. A tooth abscess could spread to your jaw, your bloodstream, your brain. Childbirth was one of the most dangerous things a woman could do. Puerperal fever, caused by streptococcal bacteria introduced during delivery, killed roughly 1 in 100 mothers in hospitals. In some maternity wards, the death rate reached 25%. Pneumonia was called the captain of the men of death. Before antibiotics, if you caught bacterial pneumonia, you had roughly a 30% chance of dying. Today it is less than 5%. Tuberculosis killed 1 in 4 Europeans in the 19th century. Strep throat, a minor annoyance today, could lead to rheumatic fever, permanent heart damage, and death in children. In World War I, more soldiers died from infected wounds than from the wounds themselves. A bullet wound that today would require a course of antibiotics and a bandage change could kill a young man in a trench through gas gangrene within days. Military surgeons amputated limbs not because the limb was destroyed but because it was infected and the infection would spread. The only treatment was to cut. Life expectancy in the United States in 1900 was approximately 47 years. By 1950, it was 68. Antibiotics, along with sanitation, vaccines, and nutrition, were responsible for that 21-year leap. But antibiotics were arguably the single most impactful factor because they turned previously fatal conditions into treatable ones overnight. Without antibiotics, modern surgery does not exist as we know it. Every time a surgeon opens your body, bacteria can enter. Antibiotics are given before, during, and after surgery to prevent infection. Open heart surgery, hip replacements, appendectomies, cesarean sections, all of them carry a vastly higher death risk without antibiotics. Organ transplants are essentially impossible. Transplant patients take immunosuppressive drugs that cripple their immune system to prevent rejection. Without antibiotics to cover that vulnerability, even a common cold could become fatal. Cancer chemotherapy becomes far more dangerous. Chemotherapy destroys fast-dividing cells, including the white blood cells that fight infection. During treatment, cancer patients are severely immunocompromised. Antibiotics are what keeps them alive while the chemo does its work. Without antibiotics, chemotherapy kills far more patients from secondary infections. The entire field of oncology is constrained. Dental work becomes dangerous. A tooth extraction that today requires a prescription of amoxicillin and a day of mild discomfort could become a life-threatening event if bacteria enter the bloodstream. Before antibiotics, dental infections were a leading cause of death. And here is the part that should terrify everyone. Because we may be heading back there. Antibiotic resistance is not a theoretical future problem. It is happening now. In 2019, bacterial antimicrobial resistance was directly responsible for an estimated 1.27 million deaths worldwide, and associated with nearly 5 million total deaths. That is more people than HIV, AIDS or malaria killed that year. The World Health Organization has called antibiotic resistance one of the greatest threats to global health. MSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, is already resistant to most common antibiotics. Carbapenem-resistant Enterobacteriaceae, the bacteria that have learned to defeat our antibiotics of last resort, are spreading. Gonorrhea, once easily treatable, has developed strains resistant to every known antibiotic. The problem is evolution. Bacteria reproduce fast, some species divide every 20 minutes. When you expose a population of billions of bacteria to an antibiotic, the vast majority die. But the ones with random mutations that confer resistance survive and multiply. Every time antibiotics are used, and especially when they are overused, we accelerate this selection. Approximately 70% of all antibiotics sold in the United States are used in agriculture, not to treat sick animals, but to promote growth in healthy livestock. We are breeding superbugs in factory farms. The pipeline of new antibiotics has nearly dried up. Pharmaceutical companies have largely abandoned antibiotic research because the economics do not work. Antibiotics are taken for days, not years like heart or diabetes medication. The last truly new class of antibiotics was discovered in 1987. We have been recycling variations of existing drugs for nearly 40 years. Without Fleming's dirty petri dish, the 20th century has no antibiotics. Life expectancy stays decades lower. Surgery remains primitive. Childbirth stays deadly. Minor injuries kill. Wars have higher casualty rates from infection. The entire structure of modern medicine, which assumes that bacterial infection is a manageable problem, collapses. And if antibiotic resistance continues at its current rate, we may get to find out what that world feels like anyway. Not because the antibiotics were never discovered, but because we used them so carelessly that they stopped working. Fleming himself warned about this. In his 1945 Nobel lecture, he said, "The time may come when penicillin can be bought by anyone in the shops. Then there is the danger that the ignorant man may easily underdose himself and by exposing his microbes to non-lethal quantities of the drug, make them resistant." He saw it coming. 79 years ago. We did it anyway.